the most painful medical treatments in ancient history. Imagine this. You wake up one morning with a splitting headache or a nasty cough. But instead of grabbing a painkiller or visiting a modern clinic, you're whisked away to a medieval healer. What do they have in store for you? Leeches, hot irons, maybe drilling a hole in your skull to let the bad spirits out. Centuries ago, the human body was still a vast mystery. Early medicine was built on equal parts curiosity and guesswork. Sure, they knew the heart pumped blood and bones gave us shape, but that didn't stop them from poking, prodding, and experimenting in ways that would make us cringe today. When faced with illness, people often had no choice but to put their trust in these primitive and sometimes torturous treatments. Now here's the question. Which of these ancient remedies do you think was the most painful of all? Let's take a closer look. The fiery cure for hemorrhoids, a glimpse into ancient agony. Imagine suffering from hemorrhoids, a painful and embarrassing condition even by today's standards. These days, relief is a pharmacy visit away. You can grab a soothing cream or a suppository, endure a few uncomfortable days at home, and soon be back on your feet. But centuries ago, when medical science was still shrouded in mysticism, there were no such conveniences. In fact, a botched attempt at treatment often meant a brutal infection, and in the absence of modern antibiotics, that was frequently a death sentence. You could try your luck with an apothecary, who might offer you a dubious concoction of gritty herbs and strange animal fluids. But more often than not, this would leave your stomach in knots and your symptoms unresolved. For something more effective, ancient healers turned to a terrifying method: cauterization with a hot iron rod. The logic was crude but straightforward. Hemorrhoids were open wounds, and sealing them with fire might promote healing. This barbaric practice dates back to the 4th century BC, endorsed by none other than Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine. Hippocrates had an infamous philosophy. If a disease couldn't be treated with herbs, use a blade. If the blade failed, use fire. And if fire didn't work, well, nature would take its course. In theory, the cauterization of hemorrhoids was a last resort, but in practice, it was fraught with risks. A rod too cool would fail to seal the wound but still scorch surrounding tissue, causing excruciating pain. Worse, a slip of the healer's hand could lead to catastrophic injury, fusing delicate skin to the rod or even tearing tissue away during the process. Despite the agony, some patients reported success, though it's easy to imagine that many would rather claim a cure than return for another round of torture. The truth is, this was not so much a treatment as a desperate gamble for relief. It serves as a sobering reminder of how far medical science has come, and how much we take modern, gentle remedies for granted. The agony of the ancient catheter, a journey into pain and relief. Have you ever found yourself lying in bed, the weight of a full bladder growing heavier by the minute, yet too cozy to move? Or perhaps trapped on a long drive, legs crossed, every mile stretching your patience thinner? Now imagine that sensation multiplied 100-fold. Only this time, there is no release. No matter how desperate the urge, your body refuses to cooperate. This was the cruel reality for countless souls throughout history, plagued by urinary obstructions that locked their bodies in a torturous state. And so the early healers of the world turned their ingenuity toward one goal: liberation from this relentless internal pressure. Enter the metallic catheter, a slender, unassuming tool that carried the power to turn agony into relief. These devices trace their origins as far back as 3000 BC. their presence uncovered in the ancient civilizations of Egypt, Rome, Greece, China, and India. Crafted from onion stalks, bronze, silver, and even gold, these early instruments served a vital purpose. The theory was primitive, yet profound. Like a stubbornly clogged drain, the urinary tract simply needed to be cleared. But the practice was anything but simple. Imagine, if you will, a rigid handmade rod, its edges less than perfect, slowly making its way along a sensitive, delicate path. An opiate, a draught of strong wine, or if you were less fortunate, a stick clenched between your teeth, were your only allies against the searing pain. The procedure demanded both precision and courage, for an error could leave behind unseen damage, debris, or infection, a high price to pay for relief. Yet even knowing the risks, many chose this path, for the alternative, a life of unrelenting pain, bloated organs, and eventual kidney failure, was far worse. Over the centuries, technology evolved. Catheters became softer, more flexible, and better suited to the body's curves. But the lesson of those early days remains timeless. Sometimes, a few moments of unbearable pain are the gateway to long-awaited freedom. So the next time you feel the familiar pressure of a full bladder, remember those who once faced far darker choices, and be grateful for modern mercy. 3. When stones became nightmares. The agony of ancient lithotomy. Imagine this. You feel an unbearable, growing pressure deep within your lower abdomen. Every movement sends a sharp twinge through your body. Urination becomes a torment, each attempt thwarted by an unseen enemy lodged within. No amount of rest or herbal tincture can ease this relentless pain. In ancient times, this was not an uncommon plight, a calcified stone trapped within the bladder. And if it refused to pass naturally, your fate was sealed. Surgical intervention was the only hope. But surgery then was nothing like the sterile, precision-guided procedures of today. The origins of this desperate remedy trace back to ancient Greece. The term lithotomy comes from lithos, meaning stone, and tomos, meaning cut. Quite literally, surgeons were tasked with cutting for the stone. Today, modern lithotomy involves a minor abdominal incision with the aid of a tiny camera to locate and remove the stone. Back then, it was far more brutal. The approach? Through the perineum, that thin stretch of flesh between the genitals and the anus, often colloquially referred to as the taint. Picture this. You're laid flat on a wooden table, knees drawn tightly to your chest. There is no anesthesia. The surgeon, knife in hand, makes a deep incision through this tender region, seeking a path to your bladder. Assistants would pin you down, for once the blade touched flesh, the agony was unimaginable. Thrashing could lead to fatal injuries. Once the bladder was reached, the extraction began. The surgeon might use a hooked tool or, more viscerally, their fingers, digging and scraping as though retrieving the last stubborn crumb from the bottom of a jar. Smaller stones, less than a centimeter, were manageable, but large stones, sometimes over 4 centimeters, posed life-threatening risks. Severe bleeding, torn tissues, permanent damage. And after the stone was finally pried loose, you were lowered into a shallow bath of vinegar and salt to stem the bleeding, a stinging, searing finale, before crude stitches attempted to close the wound. Yet for all the horror, survival meant relief. The stone's removal freed the body from its silent torment. A dreadful ordeal, yes, but for many, it was a gamble between agony and life itself. Unlocking the skull, a journey into the ancient art of trepanation. Picture this. You awaken with a relentless pounding in your head. The world feels too bright, sounds too sharp, the pressure inside your skull unbearable. But this isn't the modern world. There are no painkillers, no neurologists, no CT scans. In this time, thousands of years ago, your only option lies with the village healer, a figure both feared and revered. And as you approach him, there is a strange calm in knowing what is about to happen. A ritual older than recorded history is about to begin. Trepanation. What if I told you that humans have been cutting into their own skulls for relief and healing for over 7,000 years? It sounds like the stuff of horror fiction, but in truth, it is one of the oldest known surgical practices in human civilization. From the plains of Africa to the mountains of Peru, from prehistoric Europe to ancient Polynesia, the unmistakable signs of this procedure, round or square holes in ancient skulls, have been discovered across nearly every continent. But why would anyone allow this? The reasons are both deeply physical and profoundly spiritual. In early societies, trepanation was believed to release evil spirits trapped within the mind, to cure seizures, mental illness, migraines, or even mysterious madness. In other cases, it was done to relieve cranial pressure after head trauma, something we now understand as a life-saving intervention in cases of brain swelling. And here lies the most astonishing part. Many of these ancient patients survived. Healed bone growth around trepanation sites shows that survival rates were remarkably high. Some studies suggest up to 80% of patients lived on after the procedure, their skulls telling a story of resilience and primitive surgical skill. So before we descend deeper into this ancient practice, ask yourself, how far would you go to silence the screams inside your own mind? Would you trust the hands of a healer armed with stone blades, bone scrapers, and a knowledge passed down through millennia? Let's find out. When one arrow changes everything. Picture this. You've spent months, maybe even years, training to be the best warrior you can be. Day after day, you've pushed your body to the limit. You've learned to swing a sword with perfect precision, block incoming blows, and fight toe-to-toe with the strongest of enemies. You're feeling unstoppable, like nothing could touch you. Then, the moment of truth comes. The battlefield stretches out before you. You take a deep breath, step forward, and thwack. Out of nowhere, an arrow finds its mark in your arm. Just like that, all those years of training mean nothing. It's a harsh reality of battle. No matter how strong or skilled you are, a single well-placed arrow can bring you down. Now you're lying on the ground, the world spinning a bit, and the pain setting in fast. You glance up, hoping for help, and thankfully, you see one of those newer types of soldiers making their way over. They call them medics now. Their job isn't to fight, but to patch people up and give them a fighting chance to walk away from this mess. But here's the tricky part. Arrows back then weren't just simple sticks with sharp tips. They were often designed with barbed heads, which means they were meant to stay inside you once they hit. Pulling one out isn't as easy as yanking it free. In fact, doing it wrong could tear up your insides even worse. So what happens next? That's where things get interesting and painful. Let's walk through the options, because when it comes to arrow wounds on the battlefield, there's no one-size-fits-all solution. 6. Stabbing for sight. How ancient surgeons fought cataracts. Have you ever wondered what people in ancient times would do if their vision began to cloud over, their world turning blurry as if trapped behind a fogged window? The answer might just send a shiver down your spine. You see, what we now treat with sleek lasers and modern lenses was once handled with a far more primitive approach. The procedure was called couching, one of humanity's earliest known eye surgeries designed to combat cataracts. And trust me, this was no relaxing trip to the ophthalmologist. A cataract is essentially a clouding of the eye's natural lens, scattering light and rendering the world hazy and distorted. Now imagine living thousands of years ago, where such a condition was not only a mystery, but often a sentence to lifelong blindness. But remarkably, ancient cultures weren't content to sit in the dark. In Egypt and later in India, healers devised a bold solution. Why not simply push the clouded lens out of the way? It was around the 6th century BC that the Indian physician Sushruta, yes, the man many call the father of surgery, documented couching in his medical texts. His method? Insert a fine curved needle into the eye, skillfully puncture the capsule of the lens, and dislodge it from its natural position. The goal was simple: either push the cloudy lens aside so that light could once again reach the retina, or, in some cases, press it out of the eye entirely. And while this sounds horrifying today, at the time, it was an act of hope. Sushruta emphasized hygiene far beyond his era, advocating for clean tools and an uncontaminated environment. Still, despite his pioneering mindset, infections were rampant. Sterilization was not yet fully understood. Tragically, an estimated 70% of patients were left completely blind from complications. But for those already facing inevitable darkness, a 30% chance of restored vision was a risk worth taking. Strangely enough, couching persisted for centuries in various cultures. Even now, in some remote regions, versions of it are still performed, though modern medicine offers far safer alternatives. It's a haunting reminder of how far we've come, and just how far humans have always been willing to go in pursuit of sight. In The Bleeding Cure, how ancient medicine took a deadly turn. Ah, yes, bloodletting. The so-called miracle solution of ancient medicine, and perhaps one of its most misguided. For reasons that now seem laughably absurd, this practice endured across countless cultures for millennia, cropping up everywhere from ancient Egypt around 3000 BC to Greece, Rome, medieval Europe, the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and even parts of the pre-Columbian Americas. It was, quite literally, a global epidemic of bad ideas. At the heart of this practice was the belief in the theory of the four humors, a concept introduced by none other than the famed Greek physician Hippocrates, the original father of medicine, with the iconic beard to match. According to this theory, the human body was governed by four essential fluids: blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. In an ideal state, these humors were thought to be perfectly balanced, resulting in robust health and even a sound personality. But should the scales tip, sickness would ensue. Got a hacking cough? Clearly an overload of phlegm. Experiencing digestive distress? Too much yellow bile. And for just about everything else, fevers, fatigue, headaches, rashes, or even melancholic moods, the culprit was an excess of bad blood that needed to be drained. Thus came the blade. A cut would often be made near the inner elbow, where the heart's steady pumping would send the patient's life force flowing freely out and onto the waiting bowl. Practitioners continued the bleeding until patients were noticeably pale or even unconscious, under the belief that this signaled the desired purging of disease. What was tragically overlooked, of course, was the role of blood itself. Not merely a vessel for imbalance, but a vital medium for carrying oxygen, nutrients, and immune cells. Ironically, the very act of draining blood severely weakened the body's ability to combat infection, which was a common consequence of making open incisions in an era without antiseptics. In essence, many walked in seeking relief from minor ills and left closer to death, if they left at all. Today, we can only shake our heads at the grim humor of it all, proof that even with good intentions, misguided medicine can bleed you dry. And hey, if you've made it this far, you've already proven you can handle the wild side of history. Ancient toothaches? That's old news. But strange and fascinating stories like these? There's plenty more to come. So, before you scroll away, don't forget to like and subscribe, because more curious tales and bizarre medical moments are waiting for you. Ready for the next one? Just click the next video. I'll be right there with another fascinating story to share. See you soon.